And good evening. It's time now for Talk of the Bay on KSQD. I'm your host, Rachel Ann Goodman. And today we're going to listen to and talk to a candidate for Superior Court Judge of Santa Cruz County. Bryan Hackett is running for that position. Running for any Superior Court judge position is fairly rare in California because usually the governor appoints them. So we have an opportunity to choose our judges, one judge actually, but this is the primary, so you get to pick between two people running. We did reach out to the other candidate, Alisa Thomas, and I want to read a statement by her. She did not respond to emails or phone calls, messages, so we always try to make an effort to hear both candidates in a race or many candidates in a race. And in this case, we were unsuccessful in doing that. So I'm going to read her statement and then we're going to move on and introduce you to Bryan Hackett, who is here in studio. This is from the candidate Alisa Thomas. Candidate for Santa Cruz County Superior Court. I bring decades of legal experience, broad academic training, and a deep commitment to fair and impartial justice. My legal career includes litigation in immigration and deportation defense, business and family immigration matters, and federal appellate work. I served as chair of the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and conducted legal research at Baker and McKenzie. I also completed a judicial externship with the U.S. District Court in San Jose. And she goes on to say, public confidence in our courts depends on fairness, respect, and impartial decision-making. If elected, I will serve Santa Cruz County with integrity, applying the law carefully and ensuring justice for every person who enters the courtroom. The endorsements include Judge Kaczynski, Ninth Circuit, retired Judge Cogliotti, Superior Court Judge, and Judge Zeigenhorn, Superior Court Judge. So that's the other candidate. My guest today is Bryan Hackett. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. So why are you running to be judge? You have a great career for 15 years as an attorney here in Santa Cruz County. What makes you want to switch career?
Well, I've actually been in private practice for 17 years as a criminal defense attorney, the last 15 of which it's been from my current office on Water Street across from the courthouse at Ocean Street. And I would love to think of this as the next evolutionary step in my service to my local legal community. In the last 15 years, at any given time, half or more of my caseload has been court-appointed work by virtue of how the court appointment system works in Santa Cruz. If the public defender's office has a conflict and the alternate defender has a conflict, there are attorneys who volunteer, like myself, to be on a panel of people who are willing to accept appointment in their stead. So it's been my pleasure and my honor to be able to represent a sort of marginalized, underrepresented segment of our community who can't afford legal representation. Bringing what I have learned in the last 15 years working in the building, litigating everything from speeding tickets to serious felony jury trials, coupled with the relationships I've been able to build with current and former members of the bench, district attorneys, public defenders, private counsel, county counsel, city attorney's office, and then everyone in between, the clerks, the reporters, the interpreters, the behavioral health staff, the sheriffs, probation. The combination of those two areas of experience, I think, uniquely situate me to sit on the bench and apply a broader breadth and depth of service to my community as a judge than I'm able to as a defense attorney.
So you were talking before we came on the air that you have an interesting background academically. You didn't set out to be a lawyer.
Not necessarily at first, no. I was an English major at college. I graduated with a bachelor's in English. I almost immediately was enrolled in a PhD program in literature. I left the PhD program in literature when it became clear to me that that might be a long road to a very challenging career path as far as getting work. The law degree appealed to me because I had always been interested in law, and it also was a versatile degree where I could also teach with it. I have taught criminal justice at Heald College before it closed down. I have taught at the Monterey College of Law in Monterey for a couple of years before I moved even deeper into the valley, and the commute became untenable. But law was sort of a second career for me. I was actually a tree surgeon, as they call it. I was the foreman for 2 different tree companies for close to a decade between undergrad and going back to law school.
I wonder if there's any connection between being a lawyer and chopping trees, climbing trees. Is there any connection there you can make somehow?
Well, I think in order to do what I do, you definitely have to have a level of fearlessness, and that certainly was helpful in climbing trees as well.
No kidding. I have a lot of trees people have climbed and cut, so I know how that goes, especially climbing them with a chainsaw. So tell us a little bit about the environment in this county that you have served as an attorney, as a defense attorney, and some of the biggest challenges you think are facing people going through, quote, the system.
Sure. So I have actually been fortunate enough to practice in courts from San Bernardino to Sonora. And the majority of my practice has been here in Santa Cruz, and over the last 10 to 15 years, it's become almost exclusively here in Santa Cruz. The longer I've been in practice, the more I've tried to focus on my local legal community, and I'm grateful and fortunate to be able to do that. Of all the courthouses I've worked in across the state, I would say Santa Cruz is at least atypically, if not uniquely, situated in the sense that I have grown extremely comfortable with the level of collegiality, if that's a word. I mean, the fact of the matter is we work in an adversarial system where I wake up every morning knowing I'm going to disagree with someone. And there's a way to do that and have an adversarial system that isn't hostile, and Santa Cruz does that better than any jurisdiction in which I've practiced. DAs aren't rolling over for defense attorneys or vice versa, but everyone from the bench to both sides of the aisle appears more capable in this county than others I've worked in keeping it civil, keeping it cordial, keeping it professional. And that makes it a lot easier for us to do the hard work that we have to do. The challenges that are facing the people who come in the building are myriad. One of the biggest ones may just be confusion and ignorance.
About how the system works?
Yeah, what's happening to them? You know, I mean, from the broader spectrum of, what's going on and how does this system function, but right down to what just happened. My office is directly across the street from the courthouse, and people come to my office and say, hey, I think I need an attorney. I have court on Monday. And, and I say, okay, well, let's have a seat. What's going on? What's happening Monday? And they'll say something like, well, I'm not sure. I'm either entering a plea, being sentenced, or starting my jury trial. And that's like the whole spectrum of possible things that could be happening Monday.
Gosh, yeah.
And so one of the things that I have taken great care to make sure I do is make sure that the people that I represent understand what's going on. There are certain judges who do that better than others, I think, and make sure from the bench that the most important people in the room understand what's going on. And by the most important people in the room, I'm talking about the defendant and the victim's family and the defendant's family and community members. And I think it's really important, and the bench, I think, has a better soapbox, if you will, from which to make sure everyone understands what just happened, why, and what's next. And I think that's a really, we talked a little bit before coming on the air about, the general judicial climate and people lacking some, faith in it. And I think that educational piece can be a really critical part of making sure people regain their faith in the system if they understand what's going on.
Well, the whole system of cash bail puts people in a pretty big bind as well, or plea bargains where they're pressured, to plead guilty so they can reduce their sentence, and they find out later that they didn't know what they were even agreeing to. So that education seems like an important piece so that people don't give away their rights unnecessarily.
Incredibly important. And, cash bail is a slippery slope in both directions, I think, because it's very nice. It's a lot easier to fight a criminal case. Just speaking of my experience, which is largely in criminal defense, it's a lot easier to fight a case either as an attorney or a defendant if you're home and sleeping in your own bed and, there isn't that pressure to resolve something. And California, I think, does some things right there. I think, the recent Humphreys decision, which talks about, we can't simply make it punitive and financial, and if they can't afford to pay it, that can't be the only reason they're staying in jail. There has to be a nexus to public safety. And I do think that there are several different avenues of trying to, quote unquote, fix the current bail system in a way that achieves those two competing goals of independent individual rights, innocent, not until proven guilty, unless proven guilty. But we also have public safety concerns, and there's always that tension and that balance that, largely the legislature and to some degree the bench is required to make sure they're maintaining.
I'm going to have to ask this as a radio and podcast producer, but do you think these true crime podcasts are having an impact on your ability to do your job? Because now everyone thinks they're a lawyer. Everyone thinks they're a judge.
Yes and no. I think the bigger impact, I have a coffee cup on my desk that my wife bought me that says, "Don't confuse your Google search with my law degree." And I think that this sort of, I did my own research culture that we're in, I think has a bigger impact on everybody's ability to do their job in a lot of areas because everyone thinks they're an expert of some sort or another. Yeah,
there's a lot of cultural churning in the movie world and the podcast world, all about crime, and it seems like everyone's an expert. So that occurred to me just now. Talk about our kind of revolving door of people who are impoverished, living on the streets, homeless, and they end up in jail, and then they cycle back out and come back again. How do you see that problem as a prospective judge, that you would be the one presiding over the courtroom where you see the same person, week after week?
So first and foremost, if I were honored enough to be elected judge in Santa Cruz County, like all judges of Superior Court, I would be obligated to uphold the law and enforce it as enacted. And I would also be obligated to make the decision of how that law is most effectively applied based on the admissible facts of each individual case. From a broader sort of bird's eye view, I will tell you that in close to 2 decades of experience in criminal courts, there is a very small percentage of criminal defendants I've come across who are genuinely criminogenic only. And the vast majority of people who come across my desk have some sort of related tangential issue going on, whether that be, I view this as sort of like there's a bullseye in the center of, just criminology, and then there's these concentric circles on the outside of drug addiction, alcohol abuse, mental health, veterans with PTSD, socioeconomic and financial factors, cultural and linguistic barriers. And so our law is actually set up in California to acknowledge those things, and we do have some diversion opportunities for people in almost all of those situations I just referenced, where if the case makes it appropriate and if the facts are appropriately applied, the law allows for people to be diverted out of the criminal system and into veterans court or into mental health court or into drug and alcohol rehab or treatment. None of those treatment facilities are perfect, and we don't have enough of them. But it's a step in the right direction in the sense that, we're going to get a lot more people sober and off of fentanyl in a residential treatment program than we are in the county jail at Water Street. And I've spoken with our public defender, Heather Rogers, at length during my campaign. I've known her for years and years, but I've also spoken with Chris Clark, our sheriff, a number of times during my campaign, and you might be surprised to hear how much agreement there is between a private attorney, the public defender herself, and the sheriff of Santa Cruz County in regards to our need to segment off these less criminal elements from the criminal justice system, which in the long run, if done right, can actually improve public safety by decreasing recidivism and really allow the criminal justice system to focus its resources on those that truly need those resources.
Well, yeah, it's really about social services too. If they are being remanded to mental health treatment, but there's no bed, that poses a problem. You just pushed it off onto another agency that doesn't have the resources. So we really need to address the whole cycle rather than just the legal system.
I agree 100%. As a private attorney and as a sitting judge, if I were fortunate enough to be elected, I would have no say in the allocation of county funds and the building of new facilities. But I would be 100% in support of our creating enough facilities to house the people who need the treatment that those facilities would provide.
How much has the crackdown on immigration affected the legal system in Santa Cruz County?
That's hard to say. I haven't seen a direct impact in the sense that Santa Cruz County is, different even than Santa Clara and Monterey counties insofar as how the local authorities cooperate or do not cooperate with federal authorities. I do know that over the years, we have in place in California, and I have personally had a hand in making sure that people are getting appropriately educated on their immigration rights and the potential collateral consequences to their immigration rights of any criminal situation, including retroactively. I very recently handled a case where I was able to get someone, I didn't represent the guy years ago when he was convicted, but I was able to get a conviction overturned on the basis of he wasn't appropriately advised of the long-term immigration consequences. And this is someone, it was a non-serious misdemeanor offense that could have triggered a guy who's been here for 35 years being deported, who has 2 American citizen son, a daughter, 2 children. So, I think there is interplay between the criminal justice system and the federal immigration system. But we are at least fortunate in Santa Cruz where I don't see, I've yet to see ICE in the building. So
like it is in San Francisco.
Right.
Yeah. That's a whole big can of worms. Let me reintroduce you and say you're listening to KSQD's Talk of the Bay. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, and I'm speaking with Bryan Hackett. He is a candidate for Superior Court judge in Santa Cruz County. And again, we have invited his opponent, but not gotten a response. If you have a quick question you'd like to ask, you can email us at onair@ksqd.org. And I'll do my best to ask your question of the candidate. We have just about 15 minutes left. So I did want to talk about the broader judicial climate we're living in and kind of a comment that you might have watching all of this, where it seems like one of the last kind of bulwarks against the overreach of the executive branch and of all of these agencies that seem to be attacking people is the judicial system. I don't know that comes to play too much in Santa Cruz, but I wonder what your thoughts are on it anyway, as a person and a candidate, as someone who might be a judge someday and might be required to, who knows, rule on something connected.
Like you said, I think I agree with you. It's highly unlikely as a Superior Court of Santa Cruz County judge that I might be drawn into some sort of federal affair involving the executive branch and the legislative branch or the judicial branch. But I can say that I have worked, as I've said, for close to 2 decades. I volunteered for legal aid in New York City while I was finishing my legal career. And I've worked all over the state of California since I graduated and came back. And again, the vast majority of my experience is here in Santa Cruz. And about 8 years ago, a judge pulled me aside and said, you should consider running. A judge was retiring in 2018, and she said, you should consider running. And if you don't run this year, you should begin thinking of yourself in that way, because there's a number of us on the bench who think of you in that way. Very flattering, first of all. But on top of that, it really struck a chord with me. And much of the last 8 years, I have not only been practicing in court, but I've been watching and seeing what works and what works better and what doesn't, and seeing what kind of judicial temperament and what kind of judicial delivery and what kind of judicial work I would seek to emulate. And the judges who I admire the most and who I would try to emulate the most are those who are above that fray, those who are independent, impartial. They apply the law, whether it's going to displease half of the room or not. They do so with integrity. They do so with a velvet glove so that they're not fanning any flames. But by and large, half the time a judge renders a decision, half of the room is displeased with him or her. And I think it's really important to remember that we're not in this business to, get likes, but rather to do the right thing and to uphold the law, whether it's going to displease half the room or displease the Oval Office. I don't think that changes that philosophy.
But so much has been partisanified, that what party you belong to, whether you're going to deliver for a specific type. And this goes back to the governor's race, right? If we have a Republican governor, they could be appointing judges here and elsewhere in a way we might not like here in the county.
Yeah, well, one of the things, this was a great opportunity for me. It felt like the right time. As I said, in 2018, I was encouraged to run. In 2020, I almost did. Both times I called a senior colleague, two different senior colleagues, and said, I heard you might run. Are you going to run? And both times I was told, yes, I'm going to run. And I said that I'm going to throw my support behind you. And then this time I called a senior colleague and said, I heard you might run. And he said, you heard wrong. You're running and I'm supporting you. And while, as you said at the beginning of the show, gubernatorial appointment is generally the norm, an election like this really gives the opportunity for the voters of Santa Cruz to weigh in on what kind of person they want on the bench. And that's why I've made it my absolute second or third full-time job in the last 4 months to do as much of this as possible.
We appreciate you coming in.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
being here.
Absolutely. No, we appreciate candidates coming. And we've been doing a lot of election coverage for our local communities, so they get more than a soundbite from the candidates. Going to some tougher stuff, I was going to talk to you about, the Maddie Middleton case, which keeps coming back around, sadly, because the defendant keeps getting retried in a way. And I wonder what you think about the new law that says they can try minors as adults in certain circumstances.
So I can explain a little bit procedurally. As a judicial candidate, I'm really sort of obligated to stay out of individual cases, whether future pending cases or decided cases. I'm obviously familiar with the case you're talking about. What has happened in the last 20 years is sort of 3 different permutations of that area of law as you're discussing it. Initially, there was a system whereby the district attorney's office, if certain parameters were met, the juvenile was of a certain age and the crime was in one of these enumerated serious felonies, they could do what's called direct file and say, we're just simply going to charge you as an adult. Then there was a period of time after that where they were not allowed to do that, which I believe is the period of time during which that case was decided. We're now in a third different permutation of that area of law. As the current law stands, the district attorney, or what's called the petitioner in juvenile court, is allowed to apply for transfer to the juvenile judge. And that triggers an entire process by which a whole trial happens that has nothing to do with guilt or innocence or culpability. It's called an amenability hearing, but it's as long and as involved as a trial. There's witnesses under oath, there's expert witnesses, there's openings and closings and evidence and all that. And at the end of that amenability hearing, the judge decides whether or not this juvenile is amenable to the treatment of the juvenile justice jurisdiction, and if not, they get transferred to adult court. The situation that I think you're referencing is the juvenile jurisdiction runs out somewhere at the 24th or 25th birthday of someone convicted of a juvenile offense. And there is a procedure by which they can petition to extend it. And I believe that case keeps coming back. And there's been some traction, both in Santa Cruz and, if I understand correctly, some traction in Sacramento about possibly changing that law. I know I've heard Assemblymember Pellerin talking about this, where the law could be changed so that the family of victims of those crimes, in that case it was also a juvenile, don't have to come back to court every 2 years and relive this trauma just to redecide whether or not the convicted person stays in or gets let out. And there's a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings tied up with cases like that. That it's hard to not have strong feelings about those kinds of cases. What I will say is, as a judge, the judge is required to uphold the law and enforce it as it's written and as the facts of that case were applied to it. And the law is a like almost like our Constitution. It's like it's a living document in a way that we're always tinkering with it to try and get the balance right between individual rights and public safety and community rights. And it's not always perfect, but we're always trying to make it better.
Well, that leads me to my next question, more of a broader question. Do you think that people get a fair shake in general in our judicial system?
I do. I really do. And I think that, I think that people get a fair shake in our judicial system, particularly in this community, because I do feel like we have an open-minded set of players working in that building at Ocean Street and then also down at Second, in Watsonville. Because, I think what it takes is everybody doing their job to the best of their ability and letting the law and the facts decide the cases. And the more willing people are to be open-minded to the other side's position, the more capable we are to resolve cases without dragging victims and their families too much through it. And the more we're able to get punishments that quote unquote fit the crime. And some of that is about these other ancillary issues I'm talking about, and sometimes it's just about humanization. Sometimes it's just about giving people a shot.
But it feels like right now we're in an era of the Gilded Area, part 2, where there's 2 sets of laws, one for very wealthy people and the rest for the rest of us. And that's how the news keeps reflecting back to us. These people are doing things with impunity and never getting, to jail.
One of the reasons that I have really taken it as a badge of honor to provide the same level of diligent, zealous service to my clients who can't afford me as I do to my clients who can, is that very reason. Is I think that if anything should not be deciding how a case goes, it's how much someone paid their attorney.
Well, that's a good thing. We hope that's not the case. Well, we have a closing statement if you'd like to make one. Again, I'm talking with Bryan Hackett. He is running for Superior Court judge in Santa Cruz County. And thank you for coming in. And the floor is yours for a couple more minutes before we have to say goodbye.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you again for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be here and chat with you, both about my campaign and just about politics and the radio station in general.
And the Grateful Dead, which you happen to like.
Yes. Saturday, the Grateful Dead Zone, right here on KSQD. So, yeah, look, it's just been my honor to be an active participant in my local legal community for close to 2 decades. The relationships that I've built in that building and the experience that I've gained have really made me eager to bring my service to the next level, across the street and to the next level, if you will. And I really think I'm uniquely suited to hit the ground running and get this job done on day one because of my level of not only experience in the field, but my life experience outside of the field and my personal professional relationships with everybody in the building. I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't. And what I've done for the last 4 months is rolled up my sleeves and done everything in my power to speak with whoever wants to talk to me about the campaign. And that's the same level of dedication I have brought to my private practice and the same level of dedication I would bring to the bench if I was honored to receive enough votes to be elected on June 2nd. So
we do have an election coming up, folks. And thank you so much for coming in. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Rachel. The pleasure was mine.
Thank you. That's Bryan Hackett, running for Superior Court judge. Coming up in just a moment, we'll be talking stars and the dark sky with Joe Jordan. He's an astronomer. We'll talk about some exciting things coming up in the night sky, as well as amateur astronomy and how you can educate yourself about what's up there. Probably not UFOs yet, but lots of stars and planets and things you can look at. Coming up next, it'll be a talk about stars. And at 6 o'clock, it's Ask Dr. Dawn. A medical doctor answers your questions. All of that ahead. Stay tuned.